Emma and Tom Talk Teaching, a podcast about all things education, presented by Emma O'Dooher and Tom Breeze. Episode 9, Christmas Special 2023. You like those, don't you?
I'm just so happy that we are together in person this time. I don't have COVID.
Oh, yeah.
You don't have COVID.
No. I didn't have COVID 2 years ago. I just had a cold from hell.
Yeah.
You've been listening to our advent calendar and listening to how ill I was in that Christmas special, haven't you?
I was getting myself in the mood for this recording, our sixth ever Christmas special, which is quite remarkable. And yes, we sound ill in lots of those little snippets.
Yeah, and the saddest thing is there is a video of last year's one, which is just a video of me speaking down the line with my back to the camera.
Oh.
It's the saddest thing ever. And the lights go off on me halfway through because there's not enough people in the office. Never mind, here we are, ready for our Christmas special. First one in our shiny new studio. If you haven't had a go at watching us, then this might be the one, because we're going to make full use of our snazzy equipment and our big shiny screen today.
And we're wearing our Christmas jumpers.
We are.
Tom has put up the Christmas lights. I mean, what more can you ask for, really?
What more indeed. Although if you are an audio-only person, then it will also work.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
Well, I should probably describe Tom's Christmas jumper. It's his traditional one. He gets it out every year. It's got
doesn't get much wear, you see.
It's a festive, music-themed Christmas jumper. I see headphones. I see, I want to say Fender Stratocasters.
Yes. It's all good. Little musical notes. It's my excellent but very grey Christmas jumper. And with that, it means it's time for our usual special episode where we bring each other some light items culled from all sorts of sources. The only difference being at Christmas we up the ante and go for 6 each for reasons that are lost in the mists of history.
Yeah, I think it was like the 12 days of Christmas was where it began. That's why we ended up with 6 each. But it's just a lot of homework, really.
It really
and
is.
I always try and keep it light, but somehow or other sad things happen.
You're just more serious than me, I think.
Maybe. I've tried to... I'm going to start with something a little bit more sombre. Two things. Two of my first entries are a little bit more sombre. And then I'll move on to some more uplifting offers.
Right, you better go first then.
I think I ought to. Okay, so many of you will know that sadly Benjamin Zephaniah died this month at the age of 10 to age of 65. If you are unfamiliar with Benjamin Zephaniah, you may be familiar with his poetry, or if you don't know him at all, he's a British writer, a dub poet, an actor. He was in Peaky Blinders, you may remember him from that. And also a professor of poetry and creative writing and an activist. And I remember hearing him and seeing him live speak in Bristol. He's very compelling. And I've got a really nice article from somebody called Ian Cushing, senior lecturer.
Ian Cushing.
Yeah.
We like Ian Cushing around these parts.
We
I still want him on the podcast. Come on, Ian.
Well, Ian Cushing, senior lecturer in critical applied linguistics at Manchester Metropolitan University, has written a very fitting tribute, but also very fitting to those of you out there in initial teacher education or just teachers more generally. The article published in The Conversation on the 11th of December this year is entitled Benjamin Zephaniah, How the Poet's Linguistic Anarchy and Abolitionist Politics Impacted Education and Me. So here goes. Like so many others who work in education, I was devastated to hear the news of Benjamin Zephaniah's death. His work has profoundly shaped our understandings of race, language and education, and his work continues to have enormous influence in classrooms around the world. I first encountered Benjamin's writing when I was at secondary school. Our English teacher used his poetry to explore issues of local and global injustices. Like him, she encouraged us all to challenge normative ways of using language and reject the linguistic hierarchies that shape schools. She, like Benjamin, saw teaching as a political act. My school was located in a racially diverse working class area of a post-industrial town in the north of England. The issues that Benjamin examined, race, whiteness, capitalism, colonialism, injustice, hostile policing, state violence and, of course, language, were so pertinent to us all. He wrote about things that children, parents and teachers alike recognised. For many of the children in that school, Benjamin's work will have been the first time they encountered published literature that was written in a language that represented how they spoke and that talked about the things that mattered to them. This paucity of diverse educational materials continues to this day. By far, the majority of literature that children study in schools is written by white authors. It overwhelmingly features white protagonists and is overwhelmingly written in Standard English, a colonial variety of the language that Benjamin outrightly rejected. Benjamin's work, by contrast, is shaped by his anarchist and abolitionist principles. It challenges readers and listeners to examine how language education policy, discipline practices and curricula normalise anti-black linguistic racism. Benjamin's work draws its power from the fact that he refused to separate out issues of language injustice from broader dimensions of social injustice. For him, anti-black language policing was simply part of the same logics of anti-black policing more broadly. His work is part of a long history of black resistance in British policing, which includes the policing of language. His 1996 poetry collection, Proper Propaganda, for example, brought together issues of racist policing, black culture, hostile immigration rhetoric, and linguistic colonialism. The opening lines to his poem, Neighbours, captured just that. I am the type you were supposed to fear, black and foreign, big and dreadlocks, an uneducated grass-eater. I talk in tongues, I chant at night. My first permanent academic post was in the Department of Education at Brunel University, London, where Benjamin was Professor of Creative Writing. Our offices were in the same building. I will never forget the time that he came to speak to my pre-service English teacher education group, so teacher trainees, mostly made up of students of colour from working class backgrounds. He showed up and simply said to the class, "What do you want to hear about?" "Linguistic justice," came their reply. For 3 hours we sat, captivated, listening to his stories and wisdom about anti-black linguistic racism in schools, the criminalisation of black youth in Britain, and the colonial histories of Standard English. He firmly rejected the mainstream narrative that speaking in Standard English is the solution to granting marginalised children justice. Those conversations inspired my students to engage in similar anti-racist efforts in their own teaching. I went on to collaborate with one of my students, drawing on Benjamin's ideas. We facilitated workshops with young children where they critiqued ideologies of linguistic prescriptivism and how England's education policies are linguistically oppressive. Years later, Benjamin agreed to collaborate on a research project I led on language and race in schools. Part of the project involved secondary school pupils in London reading his 2020 novel, Windrush Child. The teacher used the text as a springboard to encourage the children to examine how language, colonialism, race and discrimination intersect in Britain. As part of the project, we interviewed Benjamin on camera and showed the videos to children in the classroom. They were enthralled. They discussed how their own experiences of schooling have been shaped by whiteness, linguistic standards and colonial curricula. This experience reminded me of my own schooling in the 1990s, of hearing his poetry for the first time and of hearing my teachers talk about language, activism and social injustice. Benjamin had an incredible capacity to talk about complex issues with razor-sharp clarity. He showed how linguistic hierarchies were a product of colonialism and slavery. He rejected any theories of social justice which placed the burden on marginalised communities to modify their language. He was an abolitionist and an anti-colonial activist through and through, rejecting in 2013 an OBE because of its language of empire. Despite his untimely passing, Benjamin's words will continue to push back against the systems and structures of language policing which are so embedded within them. His work is needed more than ever before.
Ah, wonderful. And we had an article by Ian Cushing, didn't we, the other day in one of these? Yeah, about the policing of language and Standard English.
Exactly. And that's why it sort of, occurred to me that, this was not only a time to sort of mark and honour the life and work of Benjamin Zephaniah, who actually inspired a unit of work that I taught in drama back when I was in the classroom. I'm going to talk about that for my next offer. But also a lot to be thought there, for people who are working with student teachers about, we don't do enough, maybe, well, I'm speaking of myself really, to get experts in from the outside to speak to our students. Every time I do, I think I need to get more of this in, to get more voices in, to get them thinking in new different ways. But the other thing that article got me thinking about was how impossible it is to be politically neutral as a teacher. Him talking about his secondary English teacher as a sort of political activist through her teaching sort of occurred to me that, that's something that it's an interesting one to toss around in your mind about, whether teachers should allow their politics to influence the way they teach.
Yeah, I always had strong views about that as a teacher, that I should be very, very neutral. And I think I naively felt that education and politics could be separated. But as we were talking, saying to Dr. Kev the other day, they really can't.
Yeah, it's tricky. But I just thought that article just had so much in it that we haven't got time to pull out now. But it was an interesting one, and obviously very appropriate since we've had some work of Ian's of late.
Yes, wonderful, excellent. Yes, we will move on because I think this episode often runs really rather long. So I will give you my first offering, which is my, I suppose, most serious offering. It's come from X, or Twitter as we used to call it, and it comes from Dr. Emily MacLeod, who appears to be an ex-teacher who now works at UCL, and appears to have just put her doctoral thesis online, which makes me think that maybe she's completed it relatively recently. So if that's the case, Dr. Emily MacLeod, congratulations for that. She's done a very topical piece of work on teacher recruitment and why people do or don't want to be teachers, which is obviously a question that we're asking ourselves quite a lot at the moment.
It is.
Yeah, and she's done a great service to the education community. She's making the point that a 100,000-word doctoral thesis is not the most accessible thing. And so she has produced a 13-tweet thread instead, which I think is very good. I mean, I must confess mine was not 100,000 words long, but hers obviously was, considerably more substantial than mine. And she's been good enough to boil it down. So if you find at MacLeod, MacLeod on Twitter, you will find her featured tweet at the top is this one. And I'm going to read it out. First of all, she says, my doctoral thesis is now online. You can read it here, and there's a link, so you can go and read the thing. It's actually really long, so here's a summary in case you don't have time to read all 100,000 words. Thanks, Dr. Emily. It's well known that we desperately need more teachers, especially in the sciences. My research is the first study of young people's trajectories towards and away from becoming a teacher. I tracked the teaching trajectories of young people in England who expressed a prior interest in teaching over a period of 11 years. To do this, I used primary data as well as secondary data from the wonderful Aspires Science project. First, I conducted quantitative analyses of over 60,000 survey responses. I found that many more young people in England at all ages between 10 and 22 are open to teaching than is reflected in teacher recruitment data. Around 1/3 of young people at all ages. This finding is promising for increasing teacher recruitment, but my analyses indicate that this openness to teaching is the result of teaching being a common second choice or backup career aspiration, which was especially common amongst science specialists. My analyses also indicate that without targeted efforts to change the current status quo, the teaching workforce in England will continue to remain dominated by those who identify as women and those who identify as white. Through longitudinal qualitative analyses, I found the choice of whether to become a teacher is not a single decision made at one point. It's an ongoing series of negotiations. Participants went back and forth between teaching and other career options, often several times. So why, or why not, teaching? My participants were interested in teaching because they perceived it to be a career that is high in status, a profession where people use their gifts to benefit others, and high in safety, a secure and accessible route to a decent lifestyle. This safety is partly why teaching was a common backup career. Some participants thought they could afford not to become a teacher now because the door to teaching would always be open to them. For those who became a teacher by age 21, 22, teaching remained high in status and safety. For those who dropped their earlier interests in teaching, the profession was no longer high in status and or high in safety. The status and safety of teaching were therefore relative, transitory and specific to each individual, e.g. teaching is not simply low in status, but for those who feel they have lots of non-teaching options open to them, it might be. Also, those who became teachers implied retrospectively that teaching was their vocation, even if they turned to teaching after first pursuing other careers. What does this messaging mean for those who feel that teaching is not their calling? My recommendations include more targeted long-term careers education about teaching for young people, education which emphasises the skilled and professional nature of initial teacher education. You can learn how to become a teacher through specialised education. You're not born one.
Boom.
Boom. Very interesting.
Very, very interesting. And so, I mean, that is an impressive PhD, isn't it? 11 years.
I've definitely got PhD status anxiety now.
I do too. Crikey. I mean, I've got to say, that totally resonated with my own path towards teaching. It was always that backup. It certainly resonated. But that's a very good point, that if it wasn't, your calling, if you never perceived it to be your calling, then what does that mean if you fancy giving it a go later on in life?
Yeah, interestingly, I was dead set against being a teacher. I had views about being a teacher that were extremely negative until I actually tried teaching and found I loved it. And then off I went to become a teacher. But I had decided, with no reason at all, that teaching was horrible and it wasn't for me. Don't know why.
Wow. I mean, yeah, that is really powerful in terms of, the current situation and what we do next. Those recommendations are really important. Yeah, I don't remember actually in those careers talks, in all of that, I can't remember teaching being talked about. I can't remember it being sort of front and centre. It was almost one that, I'm just guessing this now, that wasn't talked about because we saw it every day, which is not a good introduction necessarily.
No, it's not. And teachers tend to not talk up their jobs often as well, quite a lot of them anyway. But you're right. We always say to the students, don't they, or the candidates who try and come on the programme, that just because you sat on the other side of the room to a teacher doesn't mean you know what teaching is. And so, actually, interestingly, her next tweet, under her pinned tweet at the moment, is a retweet of somebody else pointing out that over in England, where, of course, they are paying people a lot more money to train than they are over here in Wales, they have managed to recruit half their target for secondary ITT, as they call it over there. So it's a bit of a scary time, really. It's
a very, very scary time. And we were in a focus group quite recently, without going into too much detail about this, because we're trying to get to the bottom of this in Wales too. And it's so complex. There is no, as with all of these sorts of issues, there's no one single thing. It's a web of things that intersect that make this a very difficult problem to solve.
Yeah, particularly when you add in that little bombshell she dropped in the middle of that thread about she's got kind of data that suggests why there are so many white people teaching, and probably slightly less so in secondary, but certainly in primary, so many female teachers, which is another kind of whole issue, isn't it, really? And yeah, I think what worries me is the question is always, what is initial teacher education going to do about it? And as you said, it's a bit of a big thing for us to just fix that by ourselves.
Yeah, and as her research sort of proves, it needs to start so much earlier, doesn't it? The planting of that seed, the sort of, if people do sort of flip-flop and, they're thinking about it, they're coming in and out of it in a sort of, did she call it transitory way?
Yeah.
Then, it needs to drop into people's consciousness at regular intervals, starting, when they're quite reasonably young, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. Anyway, there we go. I'd quite like to get Emily McLeod, Dr. Emily McLeod, on the podcast, actually. So I followed her. She has followed me back. This is the beginning of getting her on the podcast, so fingers crossed.
This is you courting a future guest.
It is.
Shamefully.
Yes, behind the scenes at the podcast.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, well, you started reasonably heavy.
Yeah, fairly heavy for me.
Okay, so I'm going to stick with the Benjamin Zephaniah theme because I think he warrants 2 entries. And actually,
Absolutely.
I found out that Benjamin Zephaniah had sadly died because I switched on the radio. It was BBC Radio 4, and Lem Sissay, OBE, was talking about him because I think they were colleagues, they were friends, they worked together, collaborated. In fact, Lem Sissay adapted one of Benjamin Zephaniah's novels, Refugee Boy, into a play text that I'm going to talk about in a moment. So Lem Sissay, for those of you who don't know, is a poet by profession and playwright, amongst other things. He also, just anecdotally, and it's worth looking into this, recently adapted Franz Kafka's novella Metamorphosis, which I'm booked to go and see for the stage next year. And it's a production by the physical theatre company Frantic Assembly, who I like a lot. So that's worth a watch. However, I'm going to read you a little bit of the introduction that Lem Sissay has written to the playtext adaptation of Benjamin Zephaniah's young adult novel, Refugee Boy. And I used the novel because the play adaptation hadn't been published when I was teaching. It was published in 2013, adapted for stage. I had a scheme of work around it, and it was really, really powerful. It worked really well because the source material was so good. So just briefly, the story is one about a boy, Alem Kello, a 14-year-old refugee whose parents are from Ethiopia and Eritrea. So this is Lem Sissay's introduction. And yet immigration is as natural to us as breathing. The first act of migration is from the womb into open air. The second act of migration is learning to walk, to grow wings, and eventually fly the nest. The saying "the world is your oyster" is a celebration of migration. Ink migrates from pen to paper, words migrate from page to the stage. The English language is full of migrating words that have settled, bird-like, on line paper. The word oyster migrated from 14th century France. Shampoo came from the Hindi language of India. Bungalow came from India too. Shall we detain all words that come from foreign places? If so, I couldn't write to you now, n'est-ce pas? Like the tide, immigration goes both ways across the oceans. The BBC has reported that 1 in 10 Britons opt to live abroad, a total of 5.5 million. And I checked that stat, that it was still accurate. This was written in 2013, and it is. A total of 5.5 million, a flock. People come in too. In Refugee Boy, we see the story of just one, and through him, we get a bird's eye view of our world. For Alem, trauma is uncomfortably close. The last act of migration in all of us is when breath migrates from the body. From my own childhood, in the Lilliputian villages of Lancashire, migration has played its part. Though immigration refers particularly to a change of country, the town next to my village was not just a different country, it was a different world. I left the villages and migrated to a town, then to a city. If home is where the heart is, then it is wherever you may be. Maybe if we accepted that immigration is natural to humans, which it is after all, there would be more peace in the world. There are more languages than those that use words. I can't understand the behaviour of more people that speak my language than who don't. Work that one out. Written language is only one part of communication, which is why a play can bring something altogether different than a novel. This play grew from Benjamin Zephaniah's novel like a seed grows from a tree. Seeds are blown from trees and take root in other lands. Then in turn, they throw down seeds that take root, and so story continues. We are adapting all the time. The wind swirls around the world, carrying dust from the Sahara and food for migrating birds. The currents of the sea swish between continents and islands, shaping coastlines. Weather patterns have no respect for borders. And I'm going to stop there because he does go on a little bit more, but it's so poetic, the way he writes this introduction. And then towards the end of this intro, he honours the work of Benjamin Zephaniah and talks of him as one of Britain's most famous living poets. I think he's often referred to as the People's Poet Laureate. And I just thought it was a very fitting tribute. If you've not heard of Refugee Boy, you've got two possibilities. You've got the novel, which is a young adult fiction, and you've also got the play adaptation. And I think it's quite timely to be talking about immigration.
I was going to say, you sticking with the political and going even more topical, given we're recording this on the 13th of December. All I will say to that, to avoid breaking my usual rule of no politics, no political views, is I texted you. You know, we mentioned in a previous episode that I'm a fan of the political cartoon, and I texted you one, didn't I, with a man was in a shop saying, "My wife wants something expensive and impractical for Christmas. Do you have a Rwanda policy?"
It was Matt, wasn't it?
Matt in the Telegraph, yes, the Telegraph of all places.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, so there we are.
Lens to
say. And that concludes my section on Benjamin Zephaniah, of whom I am a fan.
Excellent. I'm going to move on to a book that I'm very, very fond of. It's probably out of print. It's been out of print for absolutely ages, but the internet is a wonderful thing. And when somebody pinched my copy, I went straight onto a well-known internet auction site or somewhere like that and bought another one for about £3. It's Gerald Moore's book, The Unashamed Accompanist, which was first published in 1943, which is probably why it's out of print, although it did stay in print for quite a long time. For those people watching on our snazzy big screen, I shall place onto it a nice picture of Gerald Moore from the book that I have in front of me, The Unashamed Accompanist. And just for you, Emma, it's a picture of him working with one great musical hero of yours, Jacqueline Dupre.
Oh, wonderful. The cellist.
Yes, the wonderful Jacqueline Dupre. Now, Gerald Moore was, in his day, the accompanist of choice to all the stars. He worked with all of them. I mean, Jacqueline Dupre being just one of an absolutely huge number of massive international star musicians. He was the accompanist of choice. And he wrote this memoir, this sort of memoir / instruction manual to being an accompanist, I guess you would call it, called The Unashamed Accompanist. And he calls it that because obviously, there has been a tendency to slightly look down on the accompanist. I say this as one myself. I worked and studied as an accompanist for a really long time. And the accompanist is basically the person at the piano who sits behind some massive diva on the stage who's soaking up all the limelight. So I used to do a lot of accompanying in university. At that time, you couldn't get any credit for being an accompanist. It wasn't a study in the university where I was. So I just did it for the love of it and had to have a different first study. But in this book, he's making the case that one should not be ashamed to be an accompanist and that it is, you know, a great kind of role to have, and it's not the same as being a solo pianist. It's a great book for anybody to read, even if they're not a pianist or an accompanist. I think there's one chapter that gets a bit technical about piano playing, and the rest of it is about how to be the kind of person who makes a good accompanist. And he makes the point that it doesn't mean you have to be sort of deferential and a kind of doormat figure carrying the bag full of frocks for the diva, but it does mean that you need a sense of partnership. You need to be prepared to save the bacon of your soloist occasionally on the stage. You need to put them at their ease. You need to provide a backing, a musical sort of backup, without being sort of insipid or transparent, and that it takes a certain personality. And some of the instructions or some of the advice he gives in the book, I feel, definitely has relevance to those of us that work in education. And I know we've talked a lot about the nature of being a teacher, haven't we, lately? And I think one of the phrases that we often seem to find racing towards our lips when we're talking about it is, it's not about you.
Absolutely.
And it's the same for the accompanist. I mean, actually, accompaniments can be very challenging to play sometimes. More challenging can be the bit where you have to actually stick with the soloist when they go completely rogue on you on the stage. There's a bit of multitasking involved. I feel the personality of an accompanist and the personality of a teacher or an educator of some kind, there are some definite overlaps. And so I've got two little bits of advice that he gives, or bits of information that he gives. The first one, very, very short, comes from the beginning of chapter 6, performance. This is the bit where he's talking about where you actually go out on the stage and perform. And it's very, very short, this bit. He says, at the risk of shattering the reader's illusions, I must tear aside the veil of mystery which shrouds the godlike figures of musicians and state that when they walk onto the platform, they are often so petrified with nerves that they would give half their fee, or nearly half, to be elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of that thing, isn't there? I mean, I know people do occasionally suggest that you and I are quite confident when we're up doing things. And of course, we've both trained as performers.
Yeah, absolutely. And that perfectly describes the way I feel still every morning that I walk out in front of my PGCE secondary drama student teachers. It's extreme nerves, but also extreme excitement to work with them. I know it sounds really cheesy, but that's resonating with me.
Yeah, I think it's important for everybody to know that everybody who performs is usually in some way keyed up with nerves. Some of us hide it. Some of us have a persona. It's the same when you're a teacher. You see these very assured people teaching and you think, gosh, they don't have a shred of nerves about them. And I think that's a really important one just to put out there from Gerald Moore about musicians, about actors and about teachers as well. And then this other one, he talks about, in the previous chapter, the artist's room, what you would probably call the green room, darling, about what you should be like when you're in there. And I have certainly, as an accompanist, had many slightly tense situations in green rooms with soloists who are, practically hysterical before they go on stage. I mean, again, back to the original point, some of these soloists who are amazing on stage are an absolute mess just before they go on and can really let it all hang out sometimes. And he says, fussiness must be avoided. A fussy accompanist will fidget any singer and positively upset the nervous ones. I feel a list of do nots might be helpful to the young accompanist. It is the product of my own painful experiences. Do not rush into the artist's room and bombard your colleague with questions. For instance, do not say, will you give me the tempo of this song so I'm quite sure about it? This will tell the singer quite plainly that the accompanist either has the jitters or was sleeping during rehearsals. Again, do not say, yesterday you felt you had a cold coming on. I'm wondering if you'll be able to take your top notes mezzo voce or not. Perhaps I'd better be prepared for you to take them forte. This is a question which the singer cannot answer until he's been on the platform. Do not go into the artist's room and say you're tired. If your singer asks you how you are, you must answer fine. You may have shooting pains in the head, have a touch of indigestion, and be limping with an ingrowing toenail, but to any questions concerning your well-being, your invariable answer is fine. A friend of mine once talked too much. He was the leader of an orchestra and shared the artist's room with the conductor. For the sake of something better to say, the conductor asked the leader how he was. The leader being the principal first violin in the orchestra, the boss of the orchestra. My friend replied, do you know that after our 3-hour rehearsal this morning, I went straight home and have been teaching ever since. I'm whacked. He dropped into an armchair. The conductor was furious. He complained to the management and asked what sort of concert would it be when his leader arrived exhausted. Thus, we may crawl on all fours in an exhausted condition to a concert, but we must walk into the hall as if we're fresh as paint. Do not at any time relate how wonderfully so-and-so sang these songs when you played for him last year. It will not help your singer. Far from it, he will not love you for it. And finally, as you walk onto the stage, do not step on the soprano's train. But actually, I think the most important one out of all of those is, if your singer asks you how you are, you must answer fine. And I think that tells us a little bit, perhaps, about how we need to be with our pupils.
Yeah, this is the really tricky thing, isn't it? If we go back to MacLeod's work from earlier, this is what makes it quite challenging, the profession. You can't really spare... we shouldn't be putting forward the idea that you should be sort of sacrificing yourself, on the altar of teaching and learning. But I do agree that there is a sort of game-facedness about teaching and about sort of avoiding all kind of distraction from the matter at hand, which is, making making things happen for the kids that are in front of you in the classroom.
Yeah, it's back to it's not about you. I mean, it's like when I was accompanying, you've got a soloist who's going to have to stand at the front and get looked at, and you're going to be slightly behind them and probably not in quite such a bright light, and people are probably not going to pay much attention to you. The pressure is lower in a way as the accompanist. It's not all about you. You have to be able to deal with that. And I think when it comes to teaching, it's not always, or it's quite rarely all about you. And so, you don't want to kind of necessarily be burning yourself out or anything like that. I mean, there was that one a couple of years ago, wasn't there, where I talked about that horrible motivational graphic about people consuming themselves while lighting the way for others. It's not that. It's about, it's not about you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's making me think all sorts of things. They're really helpful, I think, these sort of comparative roles in different professions. It got me reflecting on, when things changed for me in education was when I became a director in a school context. And, having been a performer myself for such a long time, I think this is when I realised that, I'd scratched that itch. And what I cared most about was making sure that the circumstances were right for those kids to shine, to be thriving on stage, to be enjoying themselves. And I can liken those green room situations to, sometimes, gosh, you'd be running, you'll know this from school productions, Tommy, running around at the last minute, trying to get final things sorted, but you have to convey calmness, convey that everything is going to be fine and that everything is in hand to the pupils so that they can do their best.
Yes, one to have a little think about there. Don't get me wrong, but it's not all about you.
It's not all about you. I tell you what is all about you. Solitude.
Ooh.
How do you feel about solitude, Tom?
Love it.
And
you know that.
And in what quantity?
Oh, loads. Well, not, I do need to be collaborating and, speaking to people. I think the thing about me is my happy place in terms of kind of group sizes is 2 or 3, including me. I'm very, very bad in a big group, either socially or professionally, actually. I tend not to participate or give very much in meetings or sessions where there's lots and lots of people, but I tend, I think, to give quite a lot when there's 2 or 3 people, and I'm like that socially as well. And I do need a bit of quiet time occasionally, all by myself.
And sort of, how would you characterise the way you sort of go about spending solitude or deciding to have solitude? Because this is important to the findings that I'm going to reveal from my next piece.
Okay, I don't think I've really thought about it, to be honest. I don't think I kind of have a quota or anything like that. I don't think I think, right, I've had too many people now. I must now be alone. I will be alone now. But I just think when being by myself comes along, that's fine. I'm completely fine with it. I like it. I do enjoy it. But I'm not kind of militant either way, I would say. I would say the only thing that really I'm just not at my best in is when the group size gets above sort of 3 or 4 people.
Okay. So there was quite a bit of news coverage at the start of December this year around the publication of some new research from the University of Reading, which sheds light on the complex relationship between time spent alone and mental health. And I'm reading an article published on their website at the University of Reading entitled "Alone but Not Lonely: How Solitude Boosts Wellbeing." So the study published on the 5th of December in Scientific Reports reveals that solitude has both benefits and costs for well-being. Researchers tracked 178 adults aged 35 and older in the UK and the United States for up to 21 days. Using daily diaries, the team recorded time spent alone versus interacting with others. Participants also reported daily measures of stress, life satisfaction, autonomy and loneliness. The results showed there was no clear optimal balance between solitude and social time. There was no such thing as spending the right number of hours in solitude. Spending more hours alone was linked with increased feelings of reduced stress, suggesting solitude's calming effects. A day with more time in solitude also related to feeling freedom to choose and be oneself. However, greater solitude was not all good. On days with more hours spent alone, people also reported feeling lonely and less satisfied, highlighting potential effects of social isolation. In all, everyday solitude had both beneficial and harmful relationships with well-being. Importantly, the negative impacts were reduced or nullified when solitude was motivated by personal choice rather than enforced by external factors, which is why I was asking you sort of how you go about deciding. Individuals who spent more time alone overall did not report feeling overly lonely or less satisfied, but the benefits remained. People who spent more time alone reported less stress. The authors suggest that with thoughtful use, solitude may promote wellness, but forced isolation can risk loneliness and dissatisfaction. Choosing solitude and using it intentionally for its benefits may be key to balancing solitude amid the demands of modern life, they say.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were saying that, I think probably the unhappy type of being alone is when you're alone because you've got nothing going on. You've got nothing to do, you're not involved in anything, you don't kind of have a point. But if you're alone because you're getting on with something or because you've had a really busy week and now you get a bit of me time, that's a very different kind of animal, isn't it?
Yeah, and of course, the effects of the pandemic have sort of brought the impact of solitude, quite sharply into focus. Some people really thriving in lockdowns because they had the time to work on a new hobby or have time to experience solitude, but for others it tipped into loneliness for those prolonged periods of enforced solitude. I just thought it was, something that came out a lot in the media coverage was that, like well-being, this study did not throw up a recipe for well-being via solitude. There was no sort of, as you said, you don't have a quota for how much you need. But the thing that was sort of quite important that I picked out from this was that it's when you get to choose that I'm going to have some me time now, I'm going to have some solitude. Seemed to work well in promoting wellness. So if you want to read that full article by Weinstein et al. It's entitled Balance Between Solitude and Socialising, Everyday Solitude Time Both Benefits and Harms Wellbeing. And as I said earlier on at the start of this, it's in Scientific Reports. I don't know if it's open access. I'm presuming that it is because it was linked on their website, but hopefully it's not behind an awful paywall.
There's a link there with silence as well, isn't there?
Yeah, and I nearly went too far, Tom, as I often do with you. I nearly returned to that lovely book about silence.
The Book of Silence by Sarah Maitland.
Yes.
Love that book.
But I resisted the urge because, as you said at the start, these episodes tend to go on.
Yeah, I think there's a sort of slight social stigma thing about solitude, but less than there is, I think, about silence.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Bit of a weirdo if you like silence, I think.
Yeah, I like it. I like it.
Perhaps I'll tack 20 minutes of dead air on the end of this recording. My Christmas present to the listeners.
This will just be repetitive now, but I'm sure that you told me about a famous piece.
Oh yeah, John Cage, 4 minutes 33.
That's it.
Yeah, and the point of that actually is that there isn't silence.
No, it's it's the audience, the noise. You tune in to the sound of the world around you.
Those kind of weird little things. But yeah, real silence is very hard to come by. I find. Very nice. I enjoyed that. I felt seen there. That was really nice. Thanks. I was wallowing in my truth there. Right.
Oh, we're so awful.
I know. Sorry. I shall stop now. And I will now... Right. This one's going to be a challenge for me. I really wanted to talk about this because I think it's very interesting. It's a double challenge in that I couldn't find a really concise summary of this story. I've ended up with the article from the New Yorker, and we've mentioned articles from the New Yorker before. They're amazing, but they're very, very long. I've printed it out. It's 39 pages long, so I've obviously got some serious praising to do here. The other reason this is going to be potentially a bit of a rough ride is there is some light maths involved, I'm afraid.
Okay, yeah. I'm thinking about Richard now and that episode we had a few years ago where I have to just...
Yeah, got to just,
lean into it.
Lean into the maths, because it's only light maths, and actually the maths is not the point here particularly. We don't have to really understand the maths to understand what is going on. This is a story I came across in another podcast. There's a podcast called The Studies Show, which is a kind of a bit of a pun on the studies show, that whatever, and they call it the studies show. It's a bit of a tough listen, actually. I mean, I don't like to be mean about my fellow podcasters, but one of them in particular really struggles to get to the end of a sentence in one piece, and so it can be quite a frustrating listen. They seriously need some editing on the studies show, but their topics are really interesting, and they lean into some quite hardcore sciencey stuff, and it's worth a listen if you can get past certain issues with the delivery, which definitely needs an edit. It's a story about a blog called Data Colada, which I'm assuming...
As in pina colada?
Yes, I think it's a pun on that. It's a blog called Data Colada, and it's a story about academic... alleged academic fraud, which I think pretty much people are pretty... it's not very alleged. It's pretty obvious that it happened. And this connects with some of the stuff that our good friend, Dr. Louise Allen Walker, has talked to us about, which is the quantitative research world. Now, we are not very much into the quantitative research world. We tend to work in the qualitative sphere, which means we deal with words, we interview people, and we observe things, and we write notes and that kind of thing. We don't tend to gather numbers that much in our little bit of education. And there's this sort of weird over-the-fence thing, isn't there, with quant versus qual, where sometimes the quant people will look at the qual people and think, well, that's just, load of made-up stuff. And sometimes there's a bit of a sense that the quant is a bit more kind of gold standard because there's numbers in boxes and that kind of thing. But this is a story which perhaps suggests that things might not be all as they seem in the world of quant. And we know that Louise has talked to us about, do you remember her talking about the replication crisis, where journals didn't want to print studies that attempted to replicate the results of other studies because they thought it was boring. And then suddenly a bunch of people thought, hey, let's just have a go at replicating some of these studies. I think they tried to replicate a huge pile of quantitative studies and found that loads of them didn't replicate.
Yeah.
And now there are whole journals whose whole point is publishing replications, and you have to kind of, in some journals, you have to say what you're going to do before you do it, and they say they're going to publish whether or not you get a good, neat result. But this is a case where two extremely famous academics have come a little bit unstuck with this. And when I say extremely famous, I mean serious fame. You might have heard about the idea of nudging people to change their behaviour. There was a nudge unit in 10 Downing Street in Blair's time. Obama was very into the idea of nudging. The idea that you just make a little tiny change somewhere and it changes people's behaviour. So the idea that perhaps you'll stick the healthy stuff at the front of the buffet, or you'll make organ donations opt out rather than opt in, or that kind of thing. And the idea of behavioural science became extremely fashionable and was very influential on policy, government policy. And two of the most famous data scientists, behavioural scientists, were these guys, Dan Ariely and Francesca Gino, whose specialist subject, hilariously, was dishonesty. And they wrote a number of articles on dishonesty, one of which was quite famous in its time, apparently. They produced a study which suggested that if you were working with an insurance company, doing your insurance thing for the year, asking for another year of car insurance, and they asked you what your mileage was that you drove, because that has an impact on what your insurance premium is. People are obviously they have an incentive to underreport their mileage of the year because they're going to get probably a slightly lower insurance premium. They produced a study which purported to say that they had done this test with these kind of mocked up insurance forms. They'd done it with an insurance company, and they found that if you signed a statement saying that you were going to be honest, and that statement came at the top of the form before you actually entered your mileage for the year, people were much, much more honest than if they filled in the form and then had to sign at the end. And this had a really big effect, that people were starting to change tax forms. Governments were talking about changing tax forms, putting the signatures at the top rather than the bottom, that kind of thing. And then the writers of this blog, Data Colada, got involved. There are 3 writers. I will find their names in a minute, but I have got 39 pages I'm hacking through here with this thing. Data Colada, here we go, Joe Simmons, Leif Nelson, and Yuri Simonson. They produced this blog, and they were approached by a graduate, I think she was a doctoral student actually, who wanted to criticise some of these people's work, these famous data people, behavioural people, and got really roasted by her supervisory team, who refused to let her do it, even though she really, really wanted to, because she could see there was dodgy stuff in the data. And so they contacted this blog. In a sort of nutshell, they looked at the data set, the quantitative data set, which they got hold of, this massive Excel spreadsheet, and they found some really, really strange stuff in it. Namely, one of the most obvious ones was here's where the maths comes in, Emma, right? Okay. Imagine you've got loads of drivers, right, and you ask them how many miles they drive in a year. You're going to get a sort of bell curve where there's loads of people driving a medium amount of miles and a very small number of people driving a small number and a very small number doing a large number. You get that curvy shape that we all see on graphs, so one of those distributions like a curve. When they looked at the spreadsheet, they found, when they plotted it on a graph, they found that, in fact, of all the different kind of amounts of miles, 500 to 1,000, 1,001 to 2,000, whatever, exactly the same number of people had driven each category. So instead of a bell curve, you had a massive rectangle on the graph, and it cut off at 50,000 miles, or around 50,000 miles, which was not the maximum that people could report. It was just the data suddenly cut off at 50,000 miles. So instead of having a few people at the bottom, a few people at the top, and loads in the middle, you had exactly the same number of people all the way along. You had a straight line. They also found that half of the entries in the spreadsheet were in one font and half the entries were in another font, and that each of those entries, you could find a pair, one in one font, one in the other font, that were basically twin entries. They were very, very close to each other, but they'd obviously used a random number generator. They doubled the amount of data. They'd taken the real data set, or the slightly dodgy data set probably. They'd copied it, so you had double the number of entries, and then they just added a small random amount to the second set, so they'd look slightly different, but they could pair them up really, really easily. And final thing you have to wrap your head round is the fact that nobody apparently had rounded up or down their mileage. There's this brilliant graph where you can see on one data set there's a vastly bigger number of numbers ending in 0, because people have said 500, 1,000, that kind of thing, than there are ending in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 or 9. I think there was slightly more ending in 5 as well, but loads ending in 0, because people have been rounding, because that's what you do.
I would.
1,000, 2,000 miles, whatever. Yeah. But on the other data set that they'd copied, there were no rounded numbers, which means basically that they'd taken it, they'd copied it, they'd used a random number generator to add a little bit on to make it look a little bit different. But apparently all the people in font number 2 reported their mileage absolutely perfectly down to like the last mile. Really unlikely.
Yeah.
Really unlikely.
Yeah.
And so this blog, and you can go on the Data Colada blog and you can read these hugely detailed takedowns of this very, very influential article that basically they'd faked their data.
Why?
Is the allegation. Because these two people, why? I don't know why, but because, in brackets, these two academics were earning huge amounts of money as world-famous behavioural scientists. They had the ear of the likes of Obama and Blair. One of them was earning about $1 million a year. And they were publishing, Francesca Gino apparently was publishing 10 papers to top ranked journals a year. And there's a quote from a colleague basically saying, and we know this, don't we? I mean, we don't produce top ranked papers, but 10 of them a year is going some, isn't it?
Yeah, and they weren't written by her, clearly.
Well, I mean, there was a lot of weird stuff going on. One of the weird things about her apparently was that although, as we know, there's a bit of a pecking order in academia, where you will have these research assistants who do all the kind of boring hard stuff with the data. She used to do all the stuff with the data. She used to keep her data close to her chest, and everyone's like, why is this top-ranking $1 million a year professor doing the number crunching instead of a research assistant? So anyway, Data Colada took down this article in massively impressive terms over about 4 blog posts. It ended up getting retracted. Francesca Gino, they were both subject to some significant amounts of disciplinary action by their institutions. Francesca Gino was sort of put on administrative unpaid leave and, all of that sort of stuff, suspended basically by Harvard, and then sued Harvard and the blog for $25 million, which then caused a bit of a backlash in the academic community because, these guys were pointing out pretty obvious flaws in the data, which they make available for download so you can see it yourself. And so then they ended up getting donated some massive 6-figure sum to help with their legal fees. And as they say, the case is ongoing.
Wow. Yeah. So the legal case that she mounted against, was that libel or something like that?
Yeah.
Wow.
Done them for defamation and for Harvard for, unfair, when she hasn't quite been dismissed, but she's been, suspended and all of that kind of thing. But it just kind of goes to show that this sense that the quantitative world is sort of a bit holier than thou because it's numbers in boxes. Actually, nobody was looking at these data sets. Everybody was looking at these ridiculous kind of things that people were saying, and none of this stuff was replicating. In fact, these 3 blog writers apparently published a parody article called False Positive Psychology, in which they proved, in inverted commas, that listening to the Beatles song, and you've got your Beatles jumper on today, this is good, listening to the Beatles song When I'm 64 rendered study participants literally a year and a half younger. Because they just, as they say, data will tell you anything if you torture it hard enough.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the thing that really sort of made the maths all make sense to me was the human element, which is that you're more likely to round it up. Yeah. So like knowing like true human behaviour and the qualitative sort of side of it. I know I'm what I'm really saying is that a human, if you look at the data, knowing that was gathered from humans.
Yes, and exactly, and also knowing that you would get a bell curve if you plotted the mileage of thousands of people. It's and to get a rectangle, but nobody's checking this stuff, or nobody was checking this stuff. And the job that these people have done on the Data Colada blog is super impressive, I have to say. They go into the sort of history in these spreadsheets and see that people have been moving things around in there to make the numbers sort of add up to the thing that they want to prove.
Wow. And something I notice about journal articles is that, for obvious reasons, that you don't have to include all of your appendices, including all of your raw data. Some do, but even qualitative studies, they don't include all of that raw data. They couldn't with qualitative. So you can't even check, can you? If you're the reader, you just sort of take what they're saying as true.
Yeah, you do. And I think in some of these cases they do provide the data sets and nobody was checking them.
Wow.
Which is quite amazing. Yeah.
Fair play to that doctoral student.
Yeah. If you read the New Yorker article, which is entitled "They Studied Dishonesty, Was Their Work a Lie?" Somewhere towards the middle of it, they talk about this doctoral student who wanted, I'm trying to find it now in the 39 pages, but I can't.
The question is, whilst you're looking for that, why did her supervisory team... this is the concern, isn't it, about celebrity in any kind of work sphere. As soon as somebody becomes untouchable, it sort of censors, it's kind of censoring takes place, which is essentially what happened with her supervisors, sort of warning her off questioning someone with that much status and educational prowess.
That's it. Zoe Ziani, her name is. She was reading an article. I mean, I won't go into the fine detail of the article because we'll be here all day, but it was basically that to give you an idea of how ridiculous a lot of these claims were that everybody was just swallowing. The article that she read was suggesting that networking, like going around and networking, literally made people feel unclean, which is bizarre. I mean, you can read the article to see how they came to that. She looked at the results, assumed that they'd been fiddling the figures, expressed her doubts. The advisor said, "Don't ever say that." The members of the dissertation committee couldn't understand why this nobody of a student was being so truculent. In the end, 2 of them refused to sign off on her degree if she did not remove criticisms of Gino's paper from her dissertation. One warned Ziani not to second-guess a professor of Gino's stature in this way. In an email, the advisor wrote, "Academic research is like a conversation at a cocktail party. You are storming in shouting, 'You suck.'"
That worries me in some ways more than anything else. Like, if a doctoral student cannot, it's like in any, if a student teacher can't come into a school and sort of respectfully call out something that isn't working or make a suggestion, like, that is just a real concern to me.
Yeah, definitely. It says she complied, but her professional relationships had deteriorated and she soon left the cocktail party for good.
I wonder what Ziani's doing now.
It probably says in the article, but
wow.
we probably had too long on Data Colada now. But it's fascinating if you dig into it, and don't be afraid to dig into it if you're a bit frightened of the maths, because it's like you said, it's clear and it's about human stuff. And it's so interesting.
Yeah. You explained that really well, by the way.
Thank you. I think I took a bit long.
Consider teaching.
Thanks. I don't like the idea of teaching. But yeah, I think I may have taken a little long out of our running time there, but I thought it was worth it because I've been following this story for a good few months now, and it's just fascinating.
Totally worth it. Okay, well, I'm not going to feel guilty about following it up with a little bit of a meaty one myself. It's not meaty, actually, it's just lengthy. The clip is lengthy, but it's totally worth it.
I shall fade you up then.
Okay,
there we are.
So
you are faded.
Are you familiar with Letters Live?
Ooh. Yes, I was reading about this the other day and nearly brought it to the
to the
show. Yes.
There we go. So for those of you unfamiliar with Letters Live, it's its 10th birthday this year. It started out, the first one took place in December 2013 at the Tabernacle in London and quickly established itself as a very powerful and dynamic event format that attracted outstanding talents to performing. Start that again.
And again.
As a very powerful and dynamic event format that attracted outstanding talents to performing remarkable letters in front of a live audience. And that is what it is. It is performers performing letters that have been written across, hundreds of centuries, actually. Some of these are centuries old. To a live audience, and it's a celebration, as they say on their website, of the enduring power of literary correspondence. It's incredibly funny, sometimes very moving. Each show always features a completely different array of great performers, and I think the thing is that there's this sort of mystery around who is going to turn up. I think there are some performers that regularly make an appearance. I believe Benedict Cumberbatch was one of the sort of founding members of Letters Live, and it's charitable. So I think from the outset they've been committed to promoting literacy and fundraising for literacy charities. So it's an important part of that work. So obviously I needed to play you one of these Letters Live performances. Before I do, I need to just express my love. I'm a total fangirl of Olivia Colman, CBE, who, if you don't know, was an Oscar-winning actress. She won the Oscar for her role in The Favourite. She's a British actress, incredibly funny, warm, down to earth. She's just incredible. I urge you to watch her performance of this, which is freely available on the Letters Live YouTube channel. But you're about to hear her reading a 17th century letter from a wife to her husband. Watch it, because the subtlety of what she does physically is just genius. Here goes.
My sweet life, now I have declared to you my mind for the settling of your state, I suppose that it were best for me to bethink or consider with myself what allowance were meetest for me. For considering what care I have had of your estate, and how respectfully I dealt with those which both by the laws of God and nature and of civil polity, wit, religion, government, you, my dear, are bound to, I pray and beseech you grant me, your most kind and loving wife, the sum of £26,000 per annum, quarterly to be paid. Also, I would have £600 added yearly for the performance of charitable works, and those things I would not, neither will be accountable for. Also, I will have 3 horses for my own saddle, that none shall dare to lend or borrow, none lend but I, none borrow but you. Also, I would have 2 gentlewomen, lest one should be sick or have some other let. Also, believe that it is an indecent thing for a gentlewoman to stand mumping alone, when God has blessed their lord and lady with a good estate. Also, when I ride a-hunting, or hawking, or travel from one house to another, I will have them attending me. So, for either of these said women, I must and will have for either of them a horse. Also, it's quite long, this letter. Also, I will have 6 or 8 gentlemen. And I will have my 2 coaches, one lined with velvet to myself, with 4 very fair horses, and a coach for my women, lined with sweet cloth and laced with gold, the other with scarlet and laced with silver, with 4 good horses. Also, I will have 2 coachmen, one for my own coach and the other for my women. Also, at any time when I travel, I will be allowed not only carriages and spare horses for me and my women, but I will also have such carriages as shall be fitting for all, orderly, not pestering my things with my women's, nor theirs with chambermaids, nor theirs with washmaids. Also, for laundresses when I travel, I will have them sent away before with the carriages to see all safe, and the chambermaids I will have go before, that the chambers may be ready, sweet, and clean. Also, that it is indecent to crowd up myself with my gentleman usher in my coach. I will have him to have a convenient horse to attend me, either in town or country. And I must have 2 footmen, and my desire is that you defray all the charges for me, obviously. It goes on. Also, for myself, besides my yearly allowance, I would have 20 gowns of apparel, 6 of them excellent good ones, 8 of them for the country, and 6 other of them very excellent good ones. Also, I would have you put in my purse £2,000, and so for you to pay my debts. Also, I would have £6,000 to buy me jewels and £4,000 to buy me a pearl chain. Also, seeing as I have been and am so reasonable unto you, I pray you do find my children apparel, and their schooling, and also my servants, men and women, their wages. Also, I will have all my houses furnished, and my lodging chambers to be suited with all such furniture as shall be fit, as beds, stools, chairs, suitable cushions, carpets, silver, warming pans, cupboards of plate, fair hangings, and such like. So for my drawing chambers in all houses, I will have them delicately furnished, both with hangings, couch, canopy, glass, carpets, chairs, cushions, and all things thereunto belonging. Oh, nearly there. Also, my desire is that you would pay all my debts. Build up Ashby House and purchase lands. And lend no money to the Lord Chamberlain, who would have perhaps your life from you. Remember his son, my Lord Walden, what entertainment he gave me when you were at jousting. If you were dead, he said, he would be a husband, a father, a brother, and he said he would marry me. I protest I grieve to see the poor man have so little wit and honesty to use his friend so vilely. So, now that I have declared to you what I would have, and what it is I would not have, I pray that when you be an earl, to allow me £2,000 more than I now deserve. And double attendance. Your loving wife, Eliza Compton.
Single-handedly keeping the horse industry alive there.
All of those horses. It's 6 minutes long, but that is the beauty of it. 17th century women. Who says they didn't have power?
Well, indeed. I've been meaning to do something about letters. Not letters live. I only read about that the other day, but letters in general, because I was thinking, gosh, our younger listeners used to go out. I don't know about you. Used to go out on National Youth things, and you'd go with a notebook and you'd get everybody's address, and then you'd write them letters in the year between courses, and then you'd get letters back. Crazy, hey?
Yeah, pen friends. That was a thing. Was that a thing when you were in
Well,
school?
it was. I had a German pen friend from the former East Germany who had blue hair and a parrot. Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Yeah, it is. It's potentially a dying thing,
Certainly
really. It's but I just love it. I mean, if you've just found out about it now by listening to this, I'm so happy for you, because there are some excellent videos of these performances, all accessible on the Letters Live YouTube channel. Enjoy.
Somewhere I have a box of letters from my friends from National Youth Choir and National Youth Orchestra of Wales. I have occasionally thought about finding any interesting ones and bringing one in, but we'll see.
They're like historical artefacts now, aren't they? If you go up in your attic and you find one, it's like, oh gosh, this is something from the past, isn't it?
Absolutely. Lovely stuff. Right, I'm going to accelerate slightly because we're running along as usual. Very quick tweet for us from Susie Dent of Countdown Dictionary Corner fame. She appears, I only spotted this tweet, appears at some point. She asked what were the phrases you'd like to ban. And in reverse order, number 10, my bad. Number 9, the optics of something. Number 8, so at the start of a sentence. Number 7, let's go offline. Number 6, basically. Number 5, I'm not going to lie. At 4, I wanted to reach out. At 3, like as a filler. At 2, no disrespect, but. And at 1, going forward.
I think number 5, Ruth Jones, has got something to do with, and
yes.
particularly Cardiffians. I'm not going to lie.
I'm not going to lie, no disrespect. Yeah. I think actually the biggest surprise for me in that list was the most heinous crime of all is nowhere to be seen, which is that coffee shop crime.
Literally?
I get?
Oh.
Can I get? When asked to a person. I mean, if I ever decide I want a career change and go and work in a coffee shop, the answer will be no. The idea is I get it. Stay on that side of the counter. Can I get?
Why is literally not on there?
I don't know.
I think I'm guilty of this one myself, but that is annoying as well.
Yeah.
It literally.
Yeah. Yeah. I die a little inside every time someone asks the coffee shop people, can I get a? I don't even know why. I think maybe does it minimise the sort of existence of the person behind the counter? You're not going to get it. This person is going to make it for you.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Can I just hop across the counter?
Yeah.
The optics are bad. That they say that a lot in Succession, which I'm a big fan of. I think going forward is probably said a lot in meetings. Yeah, that's
yes.
definitely said a lot. There's a few on there that actually have probably said a lot in meetings.
Where's touch base when you need it?
Yeah.
It's a dreadful abomination.
We should play bingo with these, shouldn't we?
We should. Meeting bingo. Anyway, that's a quick one from me.
Okay.
And anyone I find in the coffee shop asking, can I get, will get a swift slap.
I'm going to do it next time I go to the coffee shop. Okay, so I've got two quick ones to end with. I'm going to try and make them quick, actually. And they're a bit more soporific. So if you're, delving into your Christmas chocolate and starting to feel a tad sleepy, this will send you off.
Okay.
So The Lost Spells is kind of like the sister of, or the little sister of, The Lost Words. The Lost Words, the first collaboration by Robert McFarlane and Jackie Morris, who is the illustrator. Robert McFarlane is the writer, the poet. Was a dazzlingly original celebration of language and nature. It became a cultural phenomenon, winning many prizes, including the Kate Greenway Medal, and being adapted for folk song, for classical music, rap, film, drama, dance, radio, card games and jigsaws, as well as murals for hospital walls. I feel a bit like Olivia Colman now.
Yeah.
Also, community campaigns have now donated copies of The Lost Words to more than 2/3 of primary schools in Britain, as well as to every hospice in the country. So they are basically poems about nature and language. And I've probably said on this podcast in the past that Robert McFarlane talks about the loss of words from children's dictionaries, particularly linked to nature. And he sort of profoundly says that if we don't know the words for things in nature, we don't see them. They're not visible to us. And so that's sort of the philosophy that sits behind these books. So The Lost Spells, which I have in my hand, is its little sister. And I'm just going to read you the last of the spells, entitled Silver Birch, a Lullaby. Now, I must mention before I start that the poem refers to my silver seeker, and it's referring to a beautiful red fox who features in the illustrations going along with this poem. So here goes, Silver Birch, a Lullaby. Snow is falling, my silver seeker. Soon the path will be lost to sight. Soon the day will give way to night. Ice is forming, my silver seeker. Soon the streams will be fastened tight. Soon the shadows will claim the night. Look over your shoulder at where you have been. The edge of the wood can no longer be seen. Vast is the forest and slender your track. Harder it grows to find your way back. Even as the dusk gets dimmer, still the birch trunks glow like torches. Still the birch bark holds its glimmer. Rest your head now, silver seeker, close your eyes and cease your searches where the blackbird brightly perches, where the catkin softly brushes, here among the gleaming birches. Break of dawn is far away, but you are safe, my silver sleeper, safe to sink down deep and deeper. In the night the birches watch you with their black, unblinking eyes, standing guard and keeping vigil while you make your dreaming journeys. Round and round the dangers prowl, wolves and monsters, worries, witches, but the birches stand like churches as the dark around them surges, circles, crouches, clutches, lunges, but breaks its power on birch's branches. Held at bay until at last the sun emerges, warms the pines, the larches, lights your yawns, your stretches, there among the silver birches.
Nicely read.
I was channeling my inner Olivia Colman.
Yeah, very good.
Thanks. I thought it's quite beautiful. The illustrations are exquisite.
Lovely book.
It's a beautiful, beautiful book, which as I've said on this podcast before, I'm a sucker for a really beautiful book.
You are. I was reading somewhere that they found the golden mole.
They found the golden mole.
They found it. Do you remember the golden mole?
Yes. That's advent calendar entry. I think that's today's, actually.
Is it today's?
Yeah, the
there
13th.
We are. 13th of December. Yeah, they found a golden mole. It's not extinct. thought it was. It's my Christmas present to you, that bit of news.
Oh, send me that link. That is wonderful. That's Catherine Rundell's book, by the way. Go and have a read. It's a really great book that you gifted to me, I think, for my birthday last year.
Was it last year? I can't remember now. But yes, lovely. Oh, well, that is a lovely bit of poetry. I'm gonna bring things down a little bit now. There was a bit of a kind of atmospheric feel to that poem. I have got a story. This is to do with sound. We know I like a bit to do with sound. It's got a little bit of a connection with the stuff you were talking about earlier about solitude and silence and all of that. It's from The Telegraph, and it's by Tom Nicholson. And I was most surprised to find this article in The Telegraph, being as it's not about immigration, wokeness, or the royal family. I'm assuming Tom Nicholson has been given his P45 for writing an article not about those three things. But here we go. The mystery of the ghost frequency, the most terrifying sound known to man.
Oh, brilliant. Okay.
Strap in. Right. A long article, so I'll only read the start of it. In the early 1980s, Vic Tandy was one of a team designing medical equipment in a laboratory at Coventry University. Everybody said that the lab was haunted. It just felt weird in there. That evening, when Tandy was on his own, he felt something very strange. I was sweating but cold, and the feeling of depression was noticeable. But there was also something else, he told the Birmingham Post at the time. Suddenly he felt like he was being watched. It was as though something was in the room with me. A greyish shape appeared on the edge of his vision. The temperature dropped. As he turned to look at the shape, it disappeared. There was absolutely no evidence to support what he'd seen, so he decided he must be cracking up and went home. Tandy and his colleague Tony Lawrence wrote in a 1998 paper on the incident. Tandy was a man with many interests. He became a lecturer in information technology at Coventry University and was an engineer, but was also a keen magician and member of the Leamington and Warwick Magic Society. In his spare time, he had time to go fencing too. On another evening in the same laboratory, another odd thing happened. His fencing foil was clamped in a vice on a table in the middle of the room. Nothing else was touching it, but slowly at first, then faster and faster, the blade started to vibrate up and down. Intrigued, Tandy started to investigate and discovered a new extractor fan near the laboratory. It was sending rumbling low-frequency sound waves of 18.9 hertz into the laboratory, which were bouncing around and focusing where his foil was clamped. These frequencies were below the range that the human ear can hear, but Tandy surmised that these low-frequency sounds, known as infrasound, the polar opposite to high-frequency, high-pitched ultrasound, were what had caused his experiences. In another investigation a few years later, Tandy found that an apparently haunted 14th century cellar underneath Coventry's Tourist Information Centre was focusing infrasound at 19 hertz from the pump of a nearby fountain. So they go on to talk about these frequencies, invisible inaudible waves which seep through buildings and the ground and into our bodies, might have caused those exposed to experience what they perceived as being haunted. The so-called ghost frequency has built up quite a myth. Some say it can make you be sick, send you running from a room, or induce shivers and sweat. They even suggested it could make you see ghosts, citing a NASA report that put the resonant frequency of the human eyeball at 18 hertz. If this was the case, then the eyeball would be vibrating, which would cause a serious smearing of vision. It would not be unreasonable to see dark, shadowy forms. And then they talk about there are some film directors that put it in films, even though you can't hear it, in order to unsettle the audience. They talk about the fact that very, very big organ pipes actually produce some fundamental frequencies you can't really hear. And why were they doing that? Maybe they were, the early version of doing that, giving everybody a really profound experience in church with these very, very low frequency sounds. They talk about an experiment that they did with a kind of infrasonic cannon that they built out of a drain pipe and, did two concerts, one with and one without, and got the participants, the audience members, to rate how emotional they found the concert and found the ones who were exposed to the low frequency inaudible sounds. They had more of an emotional experience. So it could be that if you are in a place and you're feeling a little bit odd, it could be that you are experiencing inaudible infrasound at 19 hertz.
The ghost frequency.
The ghost frequency. And so, of course, I sat down with my sound editor.
Oh my God, you're going to play it to me now?
And I thought, well, let's have a listen, shall we?
Oh my God! I did not sign sign an ethics form?
No, you didn't. Don't worry. Quite apart from anything else, you would need an enormous speaker. These headphones are not going to cut it. Listeners, don't panic. You're probably listening through AirPods or something similar. It's not going to do anything. Also, probably when I make this into an MP3, it'll probably strip it out anyway. But I am going to play some nice low frequency sounds to us. Let's start at 100 hertz. 100 hertz is like mains electricity hum, when you hear something humming. That sound I'm always having to cut out of the podcast when I forget to switch the extractor fan opposite. We'll start at 100. There we go. We'll go down to 50. We'll halve it again. We'll go down to 25. And just for the fun, we'll drop down to 19. How's that for you?
I can't hear it.
No, I did say.
Yeah, but my eyeballs
how are your eyeballs?
aren't shaking.
How's your various bodily functions?
Who was that in the corner of the room?
We're about to have an incident. I have to say, I think I can hear it.
You do astonish me sometimes. I thought I heard it right at the end there, but I don't know whether it's my brain playing tricks. Yeah.
Have you seen any ghosts?
No. But that is fascinating.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, you would need a very big speaker to really do that properly. I mean, we're going to get complaints if I'm wrong, but if there's people out there all screaming, listening to this now, yeah, infrasonics.
It's amazing how you need to know, listener, that we do not confer at all over these offerings. So we're our homework. We're hearing these for the first time. And my final offering is an organist.
Oh, there we are.
And I wonder, everything you said there about, potentially an organ makes...
Yeah, they do.
Okay.
Very low frequency. I mean, actually, just very, very quickly on this, there's been all those news stories about American diplomats was it Cuba, reporting strange health conditions, which they thought might have been some sort of audio-based attack. And they never quite got to the bottom of that. I mean, the amount of energy in those low-frequency sounds. When I got on the editor yesterday and generated these low frequencies, I could hear almost nothing through my headphones, but the meters were right up in the red.
That is scary.
So there's a lot of energy there. You can't hear it. It would move a lot of air if you had a sufficiently large speaker to do it.
So what would generate it then? So like an extractor fan was doing it in the case of...
Yeah, extractor fans. I mean, obviously organ pipes are, if you've got one that's sort of 64 feet long and you've got air blowing down a pipe of that length, you'll get that kind of frequency, like an enormous recorder or an enormous flute or something like that. Pumps. There are all sorts of news stories, aren't there, about mysterious sounds bothering communities.
Wow.
This goes back to my point. It's very hard to find genuine silence.
Yeah.
Even if you can't hear it.
The ghost frequency.
The
okay.
Ghost frequency. Right, on to the organist.
On to the organist, which is kind of, yeah, you do.
Right,
it's kind of got a spooky feel to it as well.
Yeah.
Anna Lapwood.
Ah, Anna Lapwood.
She's an organist.
Yes.
She's a conductor. She's a broadcaster.
She's a social media star.
She is. Also, she holds the position of Director of Music at Pembroke College, Cambridge. She's Associate Artist of the Royal Albert Hall in London and Artist in Association with the BBC Singers. And in 2023, she was awarded the prestigious Game Changer Award from the Royal Philharmonic Society. And she's also got a record deal with Sony Classical as an exclusive recording artist. And also, she says at the end of her... I can't help it now. She says at the end of her own sort of... profile on her website, having spent some years being encouraged to play like a man, Anna is proud and humbled to see so many adopt her hashtag play like a girl.
We should say the organ world is extremely male dominated.
Okay.
Certainly has been historically.
So it's really interesting just watching her play because she is quite I don't know what her height is, but she's quite a small person. It's just a physical feat watching her play the organ. She you're about to hear a piece that's got another story to it that I'll make very brief. If you listen to our half-term special, I think it was in that episode, I was talking about Christopher Nolan.
Ah, yes.
Who I admire a lot. And one of my favourite Christopher Nolan films is Interstellar. Originally, the film score was originally composed by German film score composer Hans Zimmer. And you're about to hear Anna Lapwood playing live on the organ in the Royal Albert Hall. And it's probably worth mentioning as well that she has very happy memories of playing in the middle of the night. So she'd rehearse in the Royal Albert Hall in the middle of the night, and the crew and cleaners would often sort of whistle away, but she'd be on her own in this vast auditorium, you know, just playing the organ, which is quite spooky, I think. So we're gonna.
I trained as an organist. Very much been there.
Yeah, you've told me a few sort of ghost stories of
bring your own ghost frequency. You know, it's great.
And I just wanted to sort of share with you before we play this very short piece of music of her playing Cornfield Chase from the Interstellar film soundtrack. She says of it, it's a special one because it was one of the first film music pieces that I transcribed for the organ, and it started me off on this huge journey of exploration and discovery. I was performing a concert at Temple Church in London where the Interstellar soundtrack was originally recorded and couldn't resist trying a little bit out. I posted a short clip on TikTok and it blew up straight away. I didn't really look back after that. So this sort of really launched her as this, as you said, social media personality. And she says, this piece is also a favourite for me because we hear a softer side of the organ with very gentle strings in the left hand and flutes on the right hand. I love to show people the contrast and colours of the organ, so it's nice to demonstrate how the soft colours can carry just as much emotional weight as the earth-shattering material. And I think when this was performed to an audience, there is no audience in this clip that I'm about to play, It was accompanied by a beautiful, exquisite sort of light show. So really ambient, really amazing. So I should probably shut up now and just let you listen to it. Here goes.
Big acoustic in there.
I mean, like you talked earlier on about emotions. If I ever get to sit in that auditorium and hear something like that, I think I would most definitely be reduced to tears. I just find that, it's just phenomenal. The way it builds, this sort of like, I don't know much about music, Tom, sorry, but those bass, is it chords? Like, the atmosphere that creates, the way it sort of builds. And it's really indicative of Hans Zimmer's composition as well, and what he does when he works with Christopher Nolan, because there's often a lot of sort of suspense being built and tension building over a long period of time through the music. Dunkirk is another example of a movie that does that. Recently Oppenheimer did the same thing. I love Hans Zimmer's composition, but then hearing it being played by Anna Lapwood on that just incredible instrument is just, it's another level, I think.
Yeah, and if you go in person, you will feel the building move when that's going on. It's quite amazing.
That's a bucket list thing for me.
All right, we'll meet up somewhere where I've got permission to play, and I'll hit you with some ghost frequencies. How's that for a Christmas present?
Yeah, for sure. Sign me up.
Yeah, it's good to see some female organists, actually, because like I said, it is such a male-dominated world, and it's another very solitary world, you know, because you only get one organist at a time, and they're a bit like spiders or cats in that respect. They kill each other if they get put in a room together.
Well, I'm sure there's much more to it than this, but is it because it looks highly physically demanding?
It can be. Some of them, I mean, I don't want to go down a geek rabbit hole here, but for some of them, the action, the way that the keys connect to the pipes, is done with pneumatics or electrics and stuff like that. On the original ones, it was like a big mechanical kind of Heath Robinson-esque thing inside. And I've certainly given recitals back in the day on historic instruments where I've had to program the order of the pieces very carefully. So if there's something that had an awful lot of notes in it, I'd have something a bit gentle afterwards, and I'd also make sure I give a nice long introduction, you know, explanation of the next piece while my hands unclenched. Yeah, it can be pretty pretty hard going sometimes. Bit of a workout.
And that's why I urge you to watch Anna Lapwood playing it, actually. And not just Anna Lapwood, but any other organist that you fancy having a listen to. But she's got a YouTube channel entitled Anna Lapwood, and it's the midnight sessions that that particular piece came from. So there we are. Very musical, this.
Very. And my next one is too.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, right. We're ending with because this is the last one now, isn't it?
It is.
Yes.
It is.
Well, this is where I shamelessly try to replicate my success from last year, where we had Unsung Heroes of Music, which you really seemed to quite enjoy down the line in your COVID-y state. Last year, he's not quite such an unsung hero, but he's possibly not as sung as he should be. I'm going to detonate a bit of a nostalgia bomb on you here. I'm going to try and take you back to your younger days, coming home from school, putting on children's telly. And I am a little bit older than you, and these words sound a lot more troubling in 2023 than they might have done in the late 80s. We would come home from school and we would join Philip Schofield in the broom cupboard.
Oh, dear.
I know, that didn't age well, did it? But back in the late 80s, he was a very wholesome, very smiley TV presenter. I was thinking about this morning before we came in, and I was thinking, you're a little bit younger than me. Was it Philip Schofield?
Yeah,
it was it?
And Gordon the Gopher.
Gordon the Gopher, yeah. Okay, so we would go and we would watch the telly, wouldn't we, in the afternoons after school, or perhaps in the Christmas holidays or Saturday mornings, and Philip Schofield would sit in the broom cupboard, which for younger viewers was literally, I think, the BBC One continuity studio with some drawings up on the wall where he would self-operate all the afternoons telly. Wow. I know, he did a very good job of it. And we would watch a variety of cartoons, probably. And we might be sitting now. I have got a number of buttons here on my device because, as I said, I've got to try and do a carefully focused nostalgia bomb on you here. And as you're slightly younger than me, it might miss its target. But you might hear something like this.
Yeah, you're safe.
I'm safe.
Yeah. Oh. It's Gadget.
I've even got him on the big screen for you. Coming up.
Oh, amazing!
Thought you'd enjoy this. I should also say at this point that the Inspector Gadget theme tune, which we are listening to now, for anyone who doesn't know it, has absolutely no business having a middle eight this good. So yes,
probably might be the wrong instrument there.
Well, you mime whatever you like. It's not like we're surrounded by cameras or anything. So there we go. There we go. The Inspector Gadget theme. We might be listening to that, or I don't know. This one might land a little bit early for you, but we'll give it a try.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I've chosen well, have I?
You have.
There's a race to be on time. The competition doesn't stop. Fixing with the ladies fair. Being charming, debonair. The game will reign supreme. And no one can deny.
Another excellent middle eight. Come in here. And can we believe that in the 1980s, the theme songs for kids' programmes were so long they even had time for a cheesy key change?
Yeah. The animation is incredible as well.
There it is.
Oh, yeah! There it is!
There we go. Just gave you a little bit of nostalgia there. My unsung hero of music this year is a man called Shuki Levy. Have you heard of Shuki Levy?
Sorry.
No. Well, nor had I. But Shuki Levy was responsible for a truly ridiculous number of theme tunes of the things that the likes of you and I used to watch in our youth. Everything from the ones we've listened to, the Get Along Gang, I vaguely remember that one.
Yeah, I love the
He-Man
Get Along
and the
Gang.
Masters of the Universe.
Wow.
The Mysterious Cities of Gold. I don't know if that one was a bit early for you. That was a truly barking mad 39 episode epic adventure story set in 16th century South America, would you believe?
Wowza.
Which actually had a absolutely epic music score attached to it as well. I mean, it was a barking mad story, but the music score was absolutely amazing. Shuki Levy was born in 1947 and had a brief career as a performer. He then, I believe, he's Israeli-American. He wrote the Israeli entry for Eurovision in 1981 and then went on to write. I mean, he's got, how many has he got? It's thousands. He's got thousands and thousands of these theme songs to his name. If you check out either his website or his Wikipedia entry, you will find a dodgy cartoon from your youth that he has written the music score for.
Did he do Trapdoor?
No, he did not do that. But it was mostly the sort of American imported ones where, and in the case of the Mysterious Cities of Gold, I think it was originally Japanese and then it was dubbed into French and then dubbed into English. He did the music for that. So any of those sort of imported things that we would have listened to in our misspent or watched in our misspent youth on a Saturday morning or Christmas holidays, he has done the theme for it. He is basically the soundtrack of the youth of anybody who was growing up in the 80s or 90s.
Wow. I'm looking down the list now as we speak and this is amazing. Turtles.
Oh, yes, yes.
I was wondering if he did the raccoons. That was a favourite of mine.
I think so, but
No.
he did an awful lot. I mean, there was some sort of story, some sort of investigation by one of the Hollywood magazines that he sort of had a kind of studio type setup going. It was him and a guy called Haim Saban who was kind of like the business side of it, and they had a lot of freelance composers producing a lot of stuff which they would then put their names on and therefore get the royalties for. So there is a suggestion that not all of this stuff was absolutely done by him.
Right.
But quite a lot of it was. I mean, he has a serious claim to be called the soundtrack of all of our youths, all of us in our kind of 30s and 40s.
Incredible. I mean, I've just been transported again. You've done it again, Tom.
Yeah, you were on
love
your
the
dad's sofa,
nostalgia.
weren't you, in last year? And
I
now you've
was.
just got back from school and you're watching Philip Schofield and Gordon the Gopher.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Inspector Gadget, I loved Inspector Gadget. I did love Rainbow Bright as well.
Yeah, I
must
don't
admit.
think I
You
used to
probably
watch that.
didn't.
No. But they are, they're not bad. A lot of these scores. I mean, some of them were really kind of orchestral and epic. I mean, this will send some of our sort of people in their late 30s, early 40s completely nuts. This is his epic score for the Mysterious Cities of Gold, which is kind of electronica, orchestral kind of barking madness. Shuki Levy, this year's unsung hero of music.
You've started something now.
It's going to have to be every year, isn't it?
It
You have
is.
to find somebody. But he is the soundtrack of the youth of anybody who was in the broom cupboard with Philip Schofield.
Oh dear. What an excellent way to end.
I thought you
kind of
might like
sums
it.
up this episode. A little bit unsavoury, but also a lot of nostalgia and joy.
Yes, absolutely. So there we go. Shuki Levy, we salute you. Well done. He has got some sort of record for the number of little music cues that his name is attached to, and I think it was over 3,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's impressive. Shuki Levy, we salute you.
from our position on the sofa, still in our school uniform. We salute you.
We do. Oh, what an episode.
It has been good, hasn't it?
Yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you managed to stick with it. You
Oh,
probably had to do it in
listeners.
two or three halves.
Yeah,
Parts.
and I feel we may have shown our age a little bit with one or two of our items as well. We'll just talk of letter writing and He-Man and Inspector Gadget. I think we're officially old, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. Sadly, that is the case.
No getting away from it. But never mind. Happy Christmas, Emma.
Yeah, happy Christmas, Tom, and happy Christmas to you, lovely listener.
Yes, thanks for lovely listener. Yeah, there's only one left.
I know. I just feel like I'm talking to them directly.
I see. Yeah, that is a radio thing, isn't it? It's not that they've all deserted us.
No. Please don't
Lovely
desert
listener.
us. Please go
don't,
back.
Please don't desert us. Yeah, there we go. Have a fantastic Christmas. If you've not listened to the Advent calendar, have a good old listen because it will disappear in the new year because it's clogging up the feed a little bit.
Yeah.
Normal service will be back with something serious and very academic after Christmas.
Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you all.
You've been listening to Emma and Tom Talk Teaching, a podcast about all things education, presented by Emma O'Dooher and Tom Breeze. A special Merry Christmas to our studio support team, Rhys Evans, Jamie Hicks, Peter Lambon, Caitlin Meredith and Ethan Walsh. Podcast artwork is by Beth Blanford and the music is by Cameron Stewart. The studio manager is Adrian Rapps. Normal service will be resumed after Christmas. Until then, take care, enjoy teaching and Merry Christmas.